Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Your wife spends a lot of time traveling and doesn't know what she's doing there? That's the story today. Enjoy watching it. It was Saturday afternoon, and we had company. Jenny and her husband Trev have been our friends since we moved to Houston. We went to dinner with them, to neighborhood parties, and to each other's houses. After a movie or a walk, they were the same age as us, about 30 years old. We are all college graduates, juggling college debt, careers, and the occasional separation due to Trev and my wife Debbie's business travel. Deb was getting ready for one, and Trev had just left our house for the airport to head to the West Coast, which was his territory. This was our way of life. They traveled, and we kept the fire going at home. Jenny and I worked as an accountant and an architect, respectively. Our travel was minimal, if not infrequent. In most cases, only one of the two couples had a traveling spouse. When this happened, the other spouse would visit the couple in town for dinner or a weekend picnic. After Trev said goodbye and took a taxi to the airport, I let the girls chat in the kitchen and went to the garage. I cleaned out my workbench and then checked the security system we'd spent good money on after the recent robberies in our unit. We had microphones and cameras in every room that powered a server in the attic, connecting to our cloud account. It saved everything that was captured when each device was activated by motion sensors. I could check any room using the phone app or any computer. Out of habit, I checked to see if it was working. "How was your last trip?" Jenny asked my wife Debbie as they sat at the kitchen table. As usual, Debbie giggled. "Work, dinner, bar, and then eventually some sleep," she replied. "Is it true what they say about people who avoid their families on business trips?" Jenny was clearly worried about her husband. My wife paused before answering, a significant second pause. "I wouldn't worry too much, Jen," my wife replied, taking a sip of her drink. "Trev always comes back to your house, doesn't he?" "Yes, but I wonder what he does when he's alone, if he is alone," Jenny said, her worry evident. Her wife reassured her. "He comes home to you. Don't pay attention to what happens when he's not there." "What do you mean, Deb?" Jenny asked anxiously. "Exactly what I said," my wife replied. "What happens outside the house means nothing." I was in shock as my wife's words bounced around in my head. What happens outside the house means nothing. What happens when people aren't home doesn't mean anything? Did she really say that? I asked myself. "Debbie, what are you saying?" Jenny asked anxiously. But by this point, Debbie had become quieter and more reserved. "Nothing, Jen," she answered carefully. "Only that you are worrying in vain. Trev loves you to death. He comes home to you and loves you. His trips are just business, nothing more." I could see that Jenny was not reassured by Debbie's remark, but she politely allowed my wife to change the subject. I let them chat for a while before returning to the kitchen and pouring myself a cup of coffee. After what I heard, I wanted my mind to be clear. After another 40 minutes of small talk, Jenny drove home, and we settled in for the night. I was polite to my wife, but to say her words made me nervous would be an understatement. As she went upstairs to take a shower, various thoughts came into my head. Did she cheat while she was away? Has she really done this many times, just one time recently, weeks or months ago? But the way she said it spoke volumes. Her comment was not wistful introspection. In fact, there was no fear or disapproval in her tone, just a statement of fact, accepting it as what it is, without any disapproval. What should I do? What does any man do? Can I just say a few words to her? Am I really going to throw away 4 years of marriage? We were thinking about having children. Did she have a night while traveling? How could I be sure that the child would be mine? Then I thought, she usually traveled to Phoenix, San Diego, Seattle, and Omaha. Did she have lovers at each point, or does she only have one lover? Was he prettier? None of these thoughts made me horny. Instead, all I felt was disappointment, anxiety, and sadness. The woman I loved cheated on me. As much as I wanted to be wrong, the logical part of my mind said otherwise. My wife, Deb, behaving let slip exposed her infidelity. I didn't sleep with her that night. She came down to get me, but I acted as if I was sleeping on the sofa, with my face buried in the pillows. She tried to wake me up, but I was in a deep sleep, and she finally gave up. Not caring to turn to face her, I remained in this position until I fell into a restless sleep until the morning. The first thing I noticed when I started to wake up was the smell of coffee and the sound of sandal footsteps in the kitchen. I opened one eye and saw a cup of coffee on the table. Overwhelmed by anxiety, I said nothing and did not move, but I realized that I was only delaying the inevitable. When I opened my eyes, Debbie was standing near the sofa in only sandals and a robe. Her blonde hair fell over her right shoulder as she looked at me thoughtfully. I looked at her and stood up, not paying attention to the coffee. She gave me a worried look as I silently walked past. I locked the bathroom door and started brushing my teeth. Creaking sounds from behind the door told me she was standing outside, but then they died down. We didn't say a word to each other all morning. I was glad because I wasn't ready to talk to her. I wasn't afraid to face her. If anything, I was looking forward to it. But I had to know for sure first. I needed information. This is my nature. I never took a single step without knowing the score. Taking my laptop, I settled into an office corner in our living room. It was a desk that faced the living room from the corner, so I could work without her seeing the screen. Debbie walked past me several times from the bedroom to the kitchen but stayed away from me. The silence made me angry. Why didn't she ask me what happened? Was this part of her game? Having calmed down, I focused on finding private detectives in the cities where she traveled. After filling out the forms and writing a description of what I needed, I used my personal credit card to hire 4 detective agencies to investigate. "Are you hungry?" she finally asked around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I didn't want to eat with her. "No," I answered, pretending to be busy. She looked at me from the kitchen, trying to understand what was wrong with me, but I didn't want to look back. Any wife who had nothing to hide would wonder why her husband turned his back on her. Any wife who has nothing to worry about. "Maybe we can go somewhere," I suddenly said and stood up, reaching for my wallet, cell phone, and car keys. She looked surprised for a few seconds, then nodded and reached for her purse. She was already holding the phone in her hand. Debbie never let the phone out of her sight, and it was password protected. As we headed towards the door, I let her pass first and stared at the beautiful and young figure, a figure that until last night I considered mine, like my body. We always took my car when we went out together, so she moved to the passenger seat, waiting for me to open the door like I always did. Given recent events, this was the last thing I wanted to do, but I forced myself. Whatever happened before she left on Tuesday, I had to make sure she didn't suspect anything. I thought I might have already ruined everything. "Sorry about today," I said. "I think I made a mistake on the project and need to do some quick talk and corrections when I come in on Monday." "About Johnson's project?" she exclaimed with relief, then caught herself and looked worried. "The house I finished 3 weeks ago?" So much for her attention during our conversations, I thought. "No," I answered. "Something related to a future project. This week, I will make new drawings and correct my mistakes. Everything must be in order. I just hate making mistakes." "You're too hard on yourself," she answered more calmly. When I gave her the expected explanation, "Everyone makes mistakes," I almost said, "That's for sure," but I restrained myself. We chatted about all sorts of trifles, and then about bills. In my mind, I was thinking about how to cope with the fact that when we go to bed, there was no way I could get away with falling asleep on the couch again. When we got home, I took a shower and went to bed with my tablet to read. But I think I stared at the same page for 30 minutes while Debbie showered and left the bathroom. She put her robe back on. She did this when she was without clothes underneath, and it meant intim. I remembered the last time we made love, the last time she was in love with me. She was lying next to me in a dressing gown, but I continued to read or pretend to read. Placing her hand on my thigh, she moved closer. "Are you mad at me?" she finally said. I didn't answer but turned to study her face. I wanted to see if she would give me a sign. "I found your pills in the bathroom." "You're taking them again?" She froze at my statement. "Yes, I know," she answered. "I'm really sorry. I thought we'd wait a few months." I nodded, not wanting to make a fuss. "No problem," I replied. "You are crazy, but it was not a concern, but rather affirmation or irritation. No, I answered. I don't want a baby right now either, I didn't say, but I thought, with you. She was silent for a few seconds, then removed her hand as I lay motionless. After a few minutes, she turned away from me and turned off the light on her side. I heard her breathing. I got up, took the tablet with me, and left the room. Carson, I heard her words but closed the door and returned to the sofa. The next morning when I got up, she was already awake and dressed. It was 6 o'clock in the morning and time for my morning run. She was already dressed for work. I made you coffee, she said, and wanted to say something but stopped. She probably already realized that I was angry with her. When did you find out about the pills? She asked. I wanted to say that it was just yesterday, but I didn't want her to think that it was recent. Last week, I lied, no longer caring that I was lying to her. And you didn't bother to ask me what I thought about it, I replied. That's all no problem, Deb, I replied. If you don't want a child with me, then I don't want it either, she wanted to say something, but I passed by. I am late, I needed to run. I needed solitude to clear my head. Running has always helped me focus and pull myself together. It started in junior high, when I was in high school, then high school, the army, and then college. Running always cured my absent-mindedness and self-doubt as a young man and later as a man. Now, the married man is considering divorce. In the evening, she came home and cooked dinner. Out of politeness, I sat next to her and ate. I barely finished my plate, but I tried to be polite. Can we talk about the baby when I get home from my trip? She asked. If you want, I answered, but all I could think about was what she said to Jenny, what happens outside the home means nothing. The next morning, she was waiting for me to wake up. She was dressed for travel, her travel bag stood by the door along with her coat. Are you going to be okay while I'm gone? She asked. I will survive, I answered. I always do. This, Carson, she said. I love you. I nodded politely. She saw the pain on my face, and I saw her wince. I think I heard a sob as she ran out the door, leaving me staring at her as I heard the car start and drive away. That day, I went to see a lawyer about a divorce. Since we had no children, all we had to do was divide all the property accumulated from the first day of our marriage. But adultery was taken into account when dividing property. We didn't have a prenuptial agreement, which I now realize was stupid. But if the detectives find something useful, I might end up with most of it. But the lawyers will fight over it in court and drag out the case to get more fees. What a mess. Jenny had been texting me and leaving messages, but I wasn't ready to talk yet. Maybe I'll drop by to see her later. But she beat me to it and showed up at my work. She was waiting by my car. Why don't you answer my calls and messages? She asked. I had something on my mind, I answered. Take me to dinner and then home, she said. We need to talk. What happens when people are not home means nothing. When I reminded her of my wife's remark, Jenny nodded and looked straight at me. Where is she today? She asked. In San Diego, I answered. At least that's what she said. Did you call her at work? She asked. No, I answered, feeling stupid. Maybe it was worth it, she replied. Because I did it. I looked at her for some time. The following Friday, Debbie returned from her trip. First, she went to work and then went home. By that time, I had already prepared dinner and set the table. Oh my God, honey, she exclaimed. You gave it your all. She ran up to kiss me. It was not a tongue kiss, but it was the type of kiss that a husband and wife usually give to each other, even in public. I let her kiss me, and it was a quick kiss. There was no uncomfortable moment to worry. At that moment, I thought that this kiss and her warm hand touching my hand would be our last. Trev and Jen are coming here for dinner, I said, checking the stuffed peppers in the oven. Trev and Jen, she asked in surprise. They will come tonight, I understood her predicament. I thought you and she fell silent when she saw me turn and give her a polite, disarming smile. I guess I'll change my clothes and get ready. I watched her go into the bedroom to take off her business suit. She went to her last meeting that morning in Omaha, then flew home and walked past her office before returning. It was clear that she planned to take a shower, have dinner, and get some rest. After all, she had quite a long and stressful week, hadn't she? I checked my phone one last time for messages from Jen. On the way to the letter, it was sent 5 minutes ago. At that moment, the shower upstairs was turned off. If all goes well, Deb will be dressed soon, just in time for our guests. They're on their way, I shouted to her, but there was no answer. I could imagine why seeing them was the last thing she wanted. She came downstairs in jeans and a white t-shirt. The straps of her pink bra were visible underneath. She wore flip-flops like we both did when we relaxed at home. Smiling nervously at me, she came closer and put her hand on my shoulder. "How can I help?" she asked. "I have wine chilling in the refrigerator," I answered, checking the stuffed peppers again. "It will be ready in 15 minutes maximum." "It smells delicious," she said. "What's on the pot?" "Oro pasta," I answered. She had a sad look on her face as she nodded at my choice for dinner. This was the dish I made for her on our last anniversary after we discovered Greek cuisine on a trip to Europe. Memories of those days on our honeymoon saddened me, but this evening had to happen, and this was part of it. The table was set for 4, 2 on each side. She glanced at him briefly, then took a bottle of Zinfandel from the refrigerator, opened it, and inhaled. "Can I ask?" she managed to say before the doorbell rang. "I'll open it now," I said and left her in the kitchen. I whispered to myself, "It's showtime." I opened the door to our friends who were standing nearby. He looked a little worried, nervous, but she gave me a knowing smile and then leaned in to kiss me right on the lips in front of him. "Hello, Stallion," she said, pulling away and walking past me. I could tell Trev wasn't surprised by our public display of affection. "Hi, Trev," I said with a smile. No, I didn't grin. "Come in, Carson," he answered, going inside. Jen and Debbie were already chatting in the kitchen when we entered. For the first time in a long time, I noticed Trevor as he looked around the room. His eyes darted from Jenny to Deb and back to me. He looked like a man trying to understand what was going on. "We're having a European sit-down dinner," I announced. "Jen is sitting with me, and Deb is sitting with Trev." Trevor and my wife looked at each other quickly and then looked away when Jen giggled. "I think I like it, European theme evening, from food to seating." "What else do Europeans do?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. But Trev and Debbie said nothing as they sat next to each other. I could tell they were on edge because Jen just kept talking to them, being herself. Inside, I wanted to laugh. "Europeans share a lot more than just seats at the table," I replied with a grin to Jen, who grinned back and then laughed. "They trade spouses or enter into open marriages." "Interesting," Jen said. "What would you think of this, Trev?" He tensed. "I wouldn't like it," he replied. My wife flinched for a second and then looked away. "I don't know, Trev," Jen answered. "Perhaps the Europeans have something in this." Once again, my wife and Trev just looked at us and secretly glanced at each other. Having served the food, I offered everyone a glass of wine and did not give the two who were sitting opposite us the opportunity to refuse. I just filled their glasses. As we ate, Jen appreciated the choice of dish and how well it was prepared. Deb and Trevor politely agreed. You could say they were being polite, but they were both worried. "How was your trip, Trev?" I asked while we were eating. Both he and my wife stopped eating at the same time. It would be funny if it weren't sad to see. With each passing minute, the pain of realization hurts more and more. Only Jen's hand on my thigh calmed me. This was not intimate touch, but soothing and caring. "Everything is the same," he said. "Meet customers and our representatives in the region, then go to the next city and do it again." "You, Deb?" Jenny asked. "Same as Trev," she replied. "We both do pretty much the same work but for different companies and clients." By this time, they were both picking at their food again. This would be funny if not sad. I tried to ignore it and refilled their glasses. When we finished, which is to say, we stopped eating because both my wife and Trev had lost their appetite, Jen and I grabbed our plates. Debbie offered to help, but I stopped her. "You and Trev just got back from a trip. Go sit in the living room. We'll be there in a few minutes, okay? She said with a frightened look and a forced smile. Despite the tension, Trev wanted to say something to his wife, but she went to the bathroom. I watched them walk into the living room, giving each other questioning glances. They might have been whispering, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. But I could imagine they were worried. When Jen returned, she and I joined them. "So, you guys are not interested in an open European marriage?" I said with a grin. Jen joined me, laughing. Debbie and Trev just giggled nervously, as if it was a joke. "Too bad," Jenny added, teasing me. "They are such prudes. How about I look at something I came across this week?" "I think you'd like it," I said, turning the TV on the wall and going to the file I had saved on my hard drive. The first scene showed street scenes from the city with lots of sunshine and the coastline. It then turned around to show the naval base as the car drove north and stopped behind a taxi in front of the hotel. Trev hesitated a bit, but Debbie recognized the hotel just before the video showed first Trev and then her exiting the taxi and entering the hotel hand in hand. By this time, shock was evident on their faces. The camera followed them as they checked in and then walked to the elevator with their luggage and each other. They held hands again, and as the elevator door closed, they leaned in to kiss. "Carson, you can stop," Trevor said, but Jen stopped him coldly. "Shut up and watch," she said in a cold voice. "You both." When I turned to look at my wife, her face showed panic and shame. I saw her lips tremble as she tried to look away from the screen. The scene then changed to inside a hotel room, and yes, our stars gave a show. When I turned to look at my crying wife, I couldn't help but think, "You would cheat with someone more," I said. "You, Carson," Trev finally spoke, but he didn't say anything as Jen spanked him and glared. "That was good," Trev said. "Do you feel just as good with him sometimes?" my wife answered when her mood changed. "I asked you not to mention Carson when we did this." "Why not?" "Bad conscience," he said, returning to the room. "I just don't want to talk about him." "You're killing the mood, Trev," she replied. After that, they lay down on the bed, and the video lasted almost an hour. They both took a nap. Deb was the first to wake up and lay with her face turned away from Trevor. Then he woke up and reached out to her. She didn't resist and allowed him to turn her over onto her stomach. Jen, who had seen the video before, looked at her husband with cold, hard eyes. He was angry but resigned himself to seeing evidence of his betrayal of his wife. For her, my wife stopped watching and sobbed quietly in her arms. The faucet went out. Trevor glared at me as Jen stood up and came to sit next to me. "Well," she said, "that was quite instructive, wasn't it?" Debbie finally looked at me. "How did you find out?" That's all she asked for. I turned the screen back on. As expected, last week, he and Jen were talking in our kitchen. "Jen, it's true what they say about people who are away from their families on business trips." "Deb," I replayed. "I wouldn't worry too much, Jen. Trev always comes to your house, doesn't he?" Jen replied. "Yes, but I wonder what he does when he's alone, if he is alone," Deb said. "Jen, he comes home to you. Don't pay attention to what happens when he's not there," Jen reassured her. "What do you mean, Deb?" "Exactly what I said. What happens when people are not home means nothing. What happens outside the house means nothing. What happens outside the house means nothing." For added effect, I replayed the last phrase for them 3 times. "Here's what happened, Deb," I said. "That's what gave you away. This made me think you were cheating on me. I didn't know with whom, but then I realized that you were allowing yourself to do this. I already had suspicions." Jen intervened. "The way you two always manage to cross paths on trips, how you sometimes avoid each other in conversation." She stopped and turned to me. "It's funny how they felt guilty tonight and kept checking on each other. You were both pathetic." "I hired investigators in all 4 cities you went to," I said. She winced and shook her head. She sobbed again, knowing more was coming. The next video was of Deb with another man at a bar and then walking towards a hotel room. "Oh, you!" Trevor shouted to her. "Did you cheat on me?" Jen and I burst out laughing at his outburst and the desperation on my wife's face. They stared at each other and then back at us. "But wait," I remarked sarcastically. That's not all. The video continued with Trevor in a room in Las Vegas with a slender and muscular black woman. My husband never does this to me, said the black woman. I was glad to help, Trevor replied, entering the bathroom, and the black woman could be heard wiping his sperm off her fifth place with a napkin. Unable to contain myself, I clapped my hands. Debbie just shook her head in disgust. What a beauty, Jen said. Then, fraudeurs deceive each other. Priceless footage. After that, we all became quiet. Everyone is in their own thoughts. Deb was the first to speak. Carson, she said, looking at me with trembling lips and voice, so what remains for us? That's when I turned and looked at her seriously. You know, I told them both, Jen and I had a few days to come to an agreement and talk. We are both cooperative people. In fact, neither of us are prudes. If either or both of you had raised the issue of our exchange, perhaps we would have agreed. Honestly, I was thinking about asking you, Deb, but you chose a different path, didn't you? You could ask me openly and honestly so that we can make this decision and walk this path together. Instead, you chose the selfish way of doing what you like and keeping me in the dark. You chose lies and betrayal of me, us. You betrayed us, Debbie. How can I forgive this? How can I get past you, who decide to go behind my back and think you have the right to do whatever you want when you travel? Well, not only when traveling. How long did it take you to start doing this? Here, I bet they already did, Jen said. I was told at his work that your dear wife took him to lunch several times. Debbie turned away, and so did Trevor. So, what do you want? Trevor finally asked. Well, Jen said, looks like we have everything we need for the two of you. Neither of us has children, so all we have to worry about is dividing our assets. And since adultery can be used in court in Texas, you're both screwed, literally. Give me your phone numbers, both of you, I said, opening them. Deb winced but held it out, unlocked. Trevor balked, but Jen came over and simply snatched the cell phone from him. It's not locked, she answered, handing it to me. Give me a minute. I'll check his cloud account. It took her a few minutes, during which I checked Deb's phone. She didn't write anything down either, but I glanced at her gallery to find photos of Trev and another man. Cool, Deb, I told her, shaking my head when she looked away. So, this is how it will happen. I can never trust again. Too many lies for too long. While I was talking, Jen was calling. Let's go, she said and turned to see what was happening. You both were in companies where there are moral standards. Have you forgotten about this? I saw almost panic on their faces. Both your bosses and their legal departments would be very disappointed with your antics. One of them is a skirt chaser himself, but his company had to pay for one of his indiscretions. So now he lets his HR and legal departments go after those who break the rules. This must be your boss, Trevor, I said. Damn, he muttered. That's why you got in trouble, Jen told him. I gave you everything you ever asked for in bed. I gave you all of myself and never held back unless I was sick. You hit me in the back, Trevor. It's all over between us. Well, not yet. What do you mean? He asked. Well, I picked up the story, divorces are a given, and you will both sign papers giving us 70% of the assets. If you fight with us, your videos will go to your families and friends as well as your employers. Carson, Debbie looked at me pleadingly. Please, do not, maybe we can try to figure it out. Seriously, Deb? I grinned. If you saw a video of me having intim with Jen behind your back, would you try to figure it out? Please give me a chance, I snapped. You and I were in trouble before you left on your tour, and you decided to do it anyway. You decided to start taking the pills without talking to me. We are married. We decided to live together and make decisions together. You betrayed me and my trust even before you cheated on me with him or anyone else. You lost respect for me, so this was easy for you. I just want to know one thing. She looked away, then looked at me again. Before you, I never had experience communicating with other men. One guy came in less than a minute later, Carson. This was my experience before you. I wanted to try others and see what it was like. I stared at her in disbelief. You should have thought about that before you married me, I replied. This is when people try others, not after they get married. Marriage is not just a commitment, it is a contract between two people. This means it's just the two of them against the world, and that marriage is exclusive until both parties agree to it. Well, you know about leaving everyone else behind. She wanted to say something but stopped and then spoke. Carson, I wanted to go out and have fun before the wedding, but you showed up, and I didn't want to risk losing you. The first few years everything was so good between us, but this last year, everything came back to me. I began to wonder what other men would be like, not love, that's why I had you. Only intim, that's all I wanted. I shook my head in disappointment. All you had to do was ask me, Deb. All you had to do was talk to me. Here at home, we could find people we know and trust. Damn it, I would have let you have intimate with that, if we all decided to do it together since we were all friends. Instead, you two went behind our backs and violated our trust. Debbie, with trust and love comes respect. You've lost all respect for me to go behind my back. We could figure this out together, but you decided to do it without me. Jen nodded along with me in agreement. That goes for you too, Trev, she said. Especially after we talked. It was my turn to look at her in surprise as Trevor turned away, and Debbie looked at Jen and Trevor in shock. Did you do this? She asked. What did he say? Jen asked. That man told me he would never share me with Carson and that he would leave me if I talked about it again or he caught me. Can you believe it? Debbie shook her head at Trevor and then pushed away and punched him. You stupid, she said as he tried to cover himself from the second and third blow. When we started, I said we should bring them, didn't I? But you said no, that they will never cope with this and will abandon us. I listened to you, now where are we? You've turned into a... Deb, it didn't take long, he said angrily. And after me, you started looking for others, so don't act like a saint. I remember our first kiss at Christmas last year. You let me kiss you for a minute or two while Jen was in the bathroom and Carson went out to the car. It didn't take me long to get you into bed. Actually, less than a week. I remember that night, everything seemed so perfect, celebrating with our best friends, and while his wife and I were out of sight, he and my wife were kissing. I hate you, she said back to him. It's mutual, he replied. Jen and I watched them glower at each other for a few minutes. We looked at them with contempt and distrust. Was there any hope after that? It looked hopeless. There are too many lies and too much betrayal along the way. If we had kids or were older. I might have been weak and thought about it, but I was young and there were no children who could bind us to each other. I wanted to leave. The doorbell rang again. This time Jen opened it. She returned with a woman who was carrying 2 bags and a smartphone. Deborah Madison Kane, she asked. My wife nodded. You have been served. She gave her the envelope and took her photo. Trevor Gunderson, she asked Trev, who nodded reluctantly. You have been served. Debbie was now openly sobbing with papers in her hands. Jen turned to me and shrugged, then she approached her husband. It's all over between us. Go home, pack up your junk, and get out. I never want to see you again. Understand? If you tell me anything, the video will go to your parents, your work, and anyone else you can call a friend. Understood? Deb didn't move, but then she turned to me and did something I didn't expect. She knelt down and crawled over to me and Jen. I beg you both, please forgive me and give me another chance. I know I screwed up. It's all my fault. Do whatever you want with me, just don't throw me out into the street. Carson, please. Jen, please. Talk to him. I beg you both. Debbie looked pleadingly into my eyes. I immediately realized that this was my test as a man. Yes, I loved her. No matter how betrayed I felt, I still loved her. But still, what she did was unforgivable. But I will never trust her again. Jen is moving here and into my bedroom, I said, looking into her eyes. I saw her wince. I understand, she said, choking back a sob. I deserve it. I need to talk to her about you. Is it clear? The door closed. Trevor left, and Jen returned. What are you going to do with her? she asked. Do you know that she can't be trusted, right? I know, I answered. I'm not going to. Debbie looked at each of us in despair. Please, was all she said. Shut up, Jen replied and pushed her back to the floor. Debbie lay there for a second or two and then returned to her knees. Carson, please don't divorce me, I told her. Get your things and go. Debbie, I told her, get your things together for at least a week, and we'll talk about how you'll get the rest when you need it. When she nodded and began to sob again, her face showed despondency and sad agreement. She slowly got up and went to the bedroom to get her things. 40 minutes later, she had packed 2 suitcases, a travel bag, a laptop bag, and a purse. Jen and I watched her load everything into her car, standing side by side as she pulled over for the last time. She reached out to me, but I pulled away. She sobbed again and left in tears. Everything went better than we thought, Jen said, leaning towards me. They brought this on themselves, I added as we watched my soon-to-be ex-wife's car drive off into the distance. Every spouse has the opportunity to cheat. Not everyone does this. Funny, she said, returning with me. What's so funny? I asked Jen while she was undressing. Some people think they have an open marriage, but they forget to tell their spouse about this. Do you want an open relationship? She asked. When I pulled away, too much like dating others, I replied. Do you need it? She asked. I just need something different every now and then, Carson. It's been a while since I tried any variety. Then sometimes I may need another one, I answered. We agree, she said breathless. 3 months later, the divorce took place. Both Jen and I got the 70% we asked for. Jen sold her house, and I took out a loan to pay Debbie 30% of the house she owned. In one day in court, all financial and legal issues were resolved, but not Debbie's pain and guilt. She lost everything except her job. Her parents eventually found out when she started preparing them in case I sent them videos and photos out of spite. I've never done this. Trevor simply disappeared after his divorce from Jen was final. She had enough money to buy him out, but the last thing he told her was that he would be in touch. It's been 2 years, and we haven't heard anything from him. Debbie still works and travels. What she does doesn't matter to me anymore. The other day, Jen and I were at a cafe, and she walked by busy with her phone. Jen and I lived together, but we both were afraid of serious commitment. It's been a year since my divorce, and my memories of my time with Debbie are fading. Jen and I are talking about traveling around the world. The other day, I received a letter from Debbie. Hello Carson, hope you are healthy. I'm trying to live my new life, but to be honest, it's not easy. I miss our time together. I miss you and us. I've had so much time to think about what I did to you, to me, and to us. I ruined everything by thinking I deserved to have everything I wanted, no matter what it was. In my quest for intimate experimentation, self-indulgence, and self-fulfillment, I hurt the man I loved and lost my marriage, not to mention that she helped destroy Jenny and Trevor's marriage. It would be so easy to blame him for what happened, but we all know that's not true. Everything I did voluntarily. Nobody forced me. I owe you an apology, Carson. Not only for ruining our marriage and our life together, but also for, as you said, losing respect for you. But before I did that, I lost self-respect. I succumbed to the belief that I deserved the pleasure and experienced what I missed out on, so I have experience behind me that I never expected. Divorce, nothing about that, nothing attracts or satisfies at all. It tore me apart. I heard that you and Jen are still together. I wish you both happiness, but to say that I'm not jealous would be a lie. Take care of yourself and Jen, your unfortunately ex-wife. With love, Debbie. P.S. 2 things, loneliness sucks, and what happens outside the home means a lot. How's that for a wife? Write your opinion about it in the comments. See you in the next video.